Welcome to Learning and Teaching Systemic Therapy podcast, the official Society for the Teaching of Marriage and Family Therapy, STMFT in short, podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sofia Georgiadou. I created STMFT in this podcast as an antidote to the isolation I experienced as an early career academic. I also created STMFT in this podcast as a space to allow myself and my colleagues to share resources and bridge the way we do systemic therapy with the way we teach systemic therapy in our classrooms. Today's episode is especially exciting for many reasons. I'm honored to welcome a fellow Texas-based MFT educator and colleague from Texas Women's University, Dr. Adam Jones, and his student, Madeline Schock. I want to say a few things about Adam. He is an assistant professor of family therapy at Texas Women's University. He enjoys working with students at Texas Women's University in research, teaching, and clinical training. His research looks at therapist skill development. And this will be the core of everything we'll discuss today. He's a co-developer of the Facilitative Systemic Intervention Skills Measure with Dr. Mirna Friedlander. He directs an awesome team of raters who rate therapist responses to challenging vignettes. He has a small private practice and provides therapy services at the TWU Stroke Center in Dallas, Texas. He also likes to play the piano and the guitar, though he isn't particularly good at either of them. Welcome, Adam.
Hello, nice to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. All right. And Madeline is a master's student at Texas Women's University. She's pursuing her degree in marriage and family therapy. During her time there, she has completed clinical hours at the local school district's family center. She has worked as a research assistant for two professors and served as vice president of the Student Association of Marriage and Family Therapy. Her primary therapeutic approach is narrative therapy. She's particularly interested in working with neurodivergent children and adolescents, as well as families experiencing or adjusting to divorce. Her work with the FSIS task has significantly shaped her clinical development, and she hopes to continue growing as a therapist as she prepares for licensure and begins seeing clients as an LMFT associate. Welcome, Madeline.
Yes, thank you for having me.
We're thrilled to have you both here today. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your experiences, Adam, on training effective therapists, your collaborative research with students, and also how we can better support both students and clinicians in developing the art and the science of therapist skill development. So,
Good.
without further ado, let's dive into our first question. Mm, Tell us about the facilitative systemic intervention skills measure. Why did you develop it? What is it? Let's hear a little bit more about it.
The FSIS is a measure that we put together we've been putting together over the last couple of years. We're still continuously making small tweaks and edits to it as we go along, but really where this line of research comes from is out of some other research that has been trying to understand and explore why some therapists get better outcomes than others on a pretty consistent basis. And so what we've tried to do is build off of some research. There was some exciting research in that area that helped explain why some therapists are more effective than others. And actually, what we know is that's a big part of what explains the outcomes in therapy is what therapist you get. So it's not the approach you're using or how closely you adhere to the approach or the number of years you've been practicing or how experienced you are or what type of license you have or the the program you attended. None of those things really seem to have any impact on client outcomes, but we do see that there are these pretty vast differences in how effective therapists are. So that if you're lucky enough to work with one of these more effective therapists, you'll get better faster, you'll get better and you'll have a much higher chance of getting better than if you're paired with a less effective therapist. So that's been a conundrum we've been trying to explore and study for a couple of decades. And a little more than a decade ago, we had a breakthrough study on this. It wasn't me, it was a researcher, Timothy Anderson, who's in Ohio. He and a group of other people, they developed a measure called the Facilitative Interpersonal Skills
Mhm.
Measure. not to be confused with the FSIS. So there's the FIS and the FSIS. It may be a little confusing, but Timothy Anderson's measure is the FIS. And what was so exciting about that, what they did is they created this really innovative task. They developed a coding measure, but then they would have therapists come in and they would show them these really challenging therapy session moments, and they would have the therapist respond to the moment, to the client, as if they were the therapist in the room. And then they would take their responses and then they would rate them with this measure that they had developed. And what was so exciting about this is, for the first time, we had something that could explain the differences
Mm.
and why some therapists were more effective than others. And it's been a really exciting finding, but has inspired a lot of other research. So the FIS is being implemented in a lot of research across the world and has been implemented into a lot of training as well. And we wanted to take that FIS measure and adapt it to be something about, to help inform how we work with families, because the measure really doesn't capture any of the skills that you would need as a family therapist when you're working with more than one person at a time. So, for example, one of the skills on the FIS is empathy. But I know
Mhm.
if I'm working with a family, if I show a lot of empathy just to one person, that may really
Backfire.
yeah,
Yeah.
that could backfire, right? It'll show I'm aligned with one member of the family, or it could be seen as siding with somebody or taking a side against somebody else. And so we needed to be able to develop a measure that could encapsulate what the therapist does and how the therapist builds a relationship with a couple or a family when you have more than one person in the room at a time. So we worked to translate quite a bit of process research and other research on therapist skills when working with couples and families, and tried to put them into one more objective measure that we could use to rate therapists' responses to some of these challenging vignettes. So that's where
Um,
all of this idea came from, and that's the line of research where we're drawing our inspiration from.
Awesome. Exciting to hear the background story of this. I want to go a little bit deeper into the measure itself. So I know it captures 8 dimensions, like different systemic intervention skills. Can we briefly list the skills and talk about them a little bit more?
Yeah, so the 8 skills. The first skill is being able to be inclusive. So in
Hmm.
our responses, do we include multiple family members? We have a skill about being able to show empathy toward multiple members of the family. So
Hmm.
rather than just conveying empathy to one person, are we connecting with what the felt sense in the family is for everybody and relating to their struggles? We also have another skill on being able to respond to safety skills. So, this is something inherently when you're working with more than one person, there's going to be conflict. There might be secrets that are revealed, or maybe it's abuse or something else that comes out, or maybe it's just conflict escalating and we have to be able to bring it back down to be able to be successful in therapy. We have a skill that breaks down some of the components for managing safety concerns and creating a more productive pathways for moving forward. Another skill is having a collaborative stance. So, being able to work with the family, getting them to work together and with the therapist on whatever their goals are, understanding or conceptualizing family problems systemically. So, being to point out the interaction patterns that are contributing to or maintaining the problem. And also, we have another one that focuses on responsiveness to disparate motivations or goals. So, being able to identify what different family members are wanting out of therapy and help to create a kind of a shared sense of purpose or understanding for what they hope to achieve. The other, I think we have 2 skills, so there are 8 total. The last 2 skills are focusing on family strengths, which really focuses on being able to identify what's working well in the family, how they're working together already, what resources they have available to them to be able to resolve whatever difficulties they have. And then we have initiating interactions. So being able to get family members talking to each other in a new way to be able to resolve some of the differences that they have.
Super exciting. And these are not the typical skills that you would see in like a textbook for graduate school. Isn't that right, Madeline? Feels a little different from like coursework or like whatever you studied, because we go by models. We still teach by models and the foundations of family therapy and the different generations of models. So that
Yeah.
was quite different to be introduced to, right?
Yes, I personally loved it. I felt like it gave a little bit more of a concrete idea of what it was that I should be working on, as opposed to just like here's a model. How are you going to apply this within your therapy sessions? It actually gave specific skills that I could work on instead of just interventions to apply. And so I've loved my time working with the FSIS task. It's been really helpful in my clinical development. I started working on it before I started seeing clients, and I stayed on the rating team and as Dr. Jones or Adam's assistant, a research assistant throughout my entire internship. And it definitely shaped how I am within the therapy room. Sorry.
Awesome. Adam, you want to speak more about how you use this with students or within your classes, maybe?
Yeah. So Madeline was lucky enough to attend some of my to be in some of my classes where we experimented with some of this. And as we were developing the model, I wanted to get feedback from students and I wanted it also to be useful. So I would pull it into supervision and be able to point out what was happening in session based on some of these skills. And so really one of the nice things, and this maybe ties into your last question to Madeline, is the skills really come out of a common factors tradition. So we've developed the skills to be utilized across all marriage and family therapy theories. And we're really trying to capture what are the elements that are occurring within session that makes therapy effective. And so when we would develop these skills, I would think, how does how would Carl Whitaker do this? How would Insoo Kim Berg do this? How would this look if it were Michael White? We would really try to make sure that each of these skills were representative across any particular approach. And so that's why I think it really becomes a good teaching tool because we can help students to see how across the different theories that they're learning there are skills beneath those theories that we have in common and that they can focus on and learn and can help inform how they apply the theory to the case. So I think there is a very reciprocal process between learning some of these common elements of theory, but of therapy, but also being able to take that and connect it to theory that really helps strengthen the development of students because they get to strengthen how they conceptualize, but they also get more concrete ideas of what this looks like in the therapy room.
Awesome. And so when you talk about all the different masters of family therapy demonstrating the skills and visualizing that, I'm wondering, are there behavioral indicators? So the way you break down a skill to actually practice it or teach it, does it have specific things like that you're looking for that determine, okay, you have now demonstrated the skill or achieved the skill for students?
Yeah, the measure right now is really intended for research use, and we haven't
Mhm.
adapted it or tested it too much in the classroom. I've done some mostly. Everything within the measure is very objective, and so we've tried to operationalize how each of
Mhm.
these skills is manifest. And I think what's useful about that is it really gives pretty concrete ideas for what to pay attention to. So I know, for example, if I have clients with different goals, for example, one of those skills was responding to different goals,
Mhm.
that if I can think about the components in those skills, I can think about how I can shape my response, right? Whether that's pointing out that there is a difference in their goals already,
Mhm.
because sometimes family members don't recognize that or don't understand that there are differences, but then also highlighting The fact that it's really important in therapy that we need to have a shared understanding, and I can propose a new goal or propose some pathways forward for being able to get more on the same page with each other. And so, because it's very operationalized with some of these different components, we can help to train some of those responses in our therapists.
Lovely. Madeline, are there particular skills that have drawn more of your attention from this measure? I'm wondering, as a trainee, what you have experienced as more impactful, because I'm sure there's different levels of difficulty for each of these skills. I'm wondering from your perspective what that has been like.
For me, I came from a psychology background, but it was very individualized. It was all about individual counseling, going on to be an LPC. Coming into the program, it was a really, I wouldn't say hard change to make, but it was definitely a change to make from
Mhm.
being like seeing therapy as something for individuals to viewing it systemically, and specifically the initiating interaction, relational empathy, and the collaborative stance were the three that I was really drawn to. I feel like they can really encompass systemic thinking and working with an entire family or system instead of just one person. Being a novice therapist is already difficult enough when you're trying to figure out one person, and then you
Yeah.
add in another or two or three or four people into the room, and it just gets exponentially more complicated. And so having these skills to reflect back on and ensure that I am practicing to the best of my ability and in making sure that I'm attuning to all of my family members individually and as a system has been really helpful. And then initiating those interactions between family members during the session is something that like I have found to be extremely helpful in creating change and progress and starting those conversations. I honestly, I'm not sure where I would be if it wasn't for the work that I've done with the FSIS task and these skills.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great example of how research informs your practice, right? How you
Mm,
become a research-informed practitioner. I am also wondering, are these skills intended to be viewed as a sequence, Adam? This is a step-by-step guide. This is what you need to do in session. Is there a progression between skills?
Yeah, and when you look at how the skills are laid out, it can almost seem like there is a maybe a natural flow for how a
Mhm.
response should be shaped. But we really don't intend for it to be any sort of sequence. So these are just different skills that can be used that are all within a therapist's tool belt, really. And so, in any given response, we don't really expect that any therapist would use all eight skills. In fact, any therapist that did that would probably be talking way more than their clients would be. It's probably not very effective or productive to do that. So we don't necessarily look at it as like a step-by-step guide for how to create a response, but really separate skills that can be identified and then developed. And that's where, in some of our research, we're going to be exploring, does the way that we break down these skills help students to be able to implement and practice the skills in a way that really sticks more than if you're just maybe studying master videotapes or reading or doing role plays with a classmate. And so we want to be able to see whether we can how we can see improvement in some of those areas.
Lovely. I am wondering if you want to tell us a little bit more about the research part of this. You're training students like Madeline to rate your participant responses in your research, right? Using the FSIS. Madeline, do you want to share a little bit about what that training is like?
Yeah. So it's been a second since I went through the initial training. A lot of it was very collaborative. It was getting together with some of the other raters under Dr. Jones's supervision to go through rate responses individually, see what the inner rater reliability was, and then figuring out any small tweaks that could be made to the manual to better operationalize each of the skills. It was because some of them do have quite a bit of overlap, and so trying to differentiate between them, all of the skills are rated from a 0 to a 3. So what makes something a 3 versus a 2? And how can we ensure that we are staying objective and not getting caught up in like the content of the vignette that's influencing the responses?
Mm.
So a lot of it felt like a systemic approach to things of making sure that everyone was on the same page, that we were all understanding things. and honestly just trying to make it as objective as possible so that way it can be used by other programs, other researchers, things like that.
Super exciting. Adam, do you want to share a little bit more about research you're doing in general and what your protocol looks like?
Yeah, we have several ongoing studies right now, which is really exciting. And working with the student raters is by far the most exciting part. We have this awesome team of raters that they do it all volunteer work. They show up week in and week out. They do rating on their own time, and then they come together and they discuss it together and look for the differences, try to make sure they're understanding the manual the way it should be. And so that's a really cool experience. So we have this ongoing rating process, but we're collecting data through several different studies right now. We're actually doing a study on graduate students, so we're tracking their development of these skills throughout their graduate training. We have graduate students at the beginning of their program, the beginning of their clinical internship, and then the end of their clinical internship. They come into our research lab. Madeline helped me out with this. We would hook the students up to these wires, and so we're measuring their skin conductance or their heart rate and their breathing as well. And we're trying to get a sense of physiologically what's going on as they
Hmm.
watch these really challenging therapy vignettes and then how they respond. And so we want to see how that changes throughout the course of their program. So that's an ongoing study. We'll be wrapping that up within the next year or so. And we have a few other studies going on. We actually just finished data collection for an outcome study that we're doing. So we want to be able to see if these skills can actually predict why some therapists are more effective than others, just like the Timothy Anderson's measure that I mentioned earlier. So we've partnered with the Philadelphia Child and Family Therapy Training Center, which used to be the Philadelphia Child Guidance Center that Salvador Minuchin
Yeah.
established. They're alive and kicking. They've actually got a really impressive training model throughout the entire state. So we're working with them on this outcome study. So we're really excited to see the results of that. And we're kicking off a few other studies. We collected data from some therapists in Spain as well. We have a doctoral student in New York who's working with Myrna Friedlander, who's leading her dissertation studying some of that data from Spain. And we have several other perspective studies. So we've heard from some people in Portugal, some people in Germany, a couple other countries that are interested in
Mhm.
using some of this in their research. So we're excited to see how this grows and to get other people using the manual and seeing how it can be useful.
So exciting to have such a global impact already. And I'm very excited about publications that will come out of this and all the knowledge that will be disseminated. And almost feels like it will shift the way we train therapists in our field. Adam, what do you think about that?
I hope so. I think there are a lot of things we still do really well as a field when it comes to training. But
Mm.
I think there are a lot of ways that we can improve our training, and one of them is to have if we could have some sort of objective measure of where our students are, I think that would be useful. And that's where I hope this can impact the training the most is whether is to see if there are ways that we can really train and implement these skills so that those benefits trickle down to the clients that our students are working with. And ideally, the clients improve as well. My hope is that we can set a trajectory where students can continually improve even throughout, even after graduate school, where they can focus on where they can identify skills that may be lacking and focus and have targeted ways to improve and direct those.
Yeah.
In fact, me and Myrna Friedlander, who wrote the measure, we talk about this all the time, how, boy, I wish I had something like this in graduate
I
school,
know.
uh, where I could have had something to refer to just think through what I could have said, or, oh boy, that session didn't go well, or I'm rewatching this video, but I don't know what I could have done differently. And just having something to be able to break down some of those core elements of productive and effective therapy, I think would have been really helpful. I hope, even just on a very practical sense, the ways that we train therapists can change quite a bit. And we can brainstorm a lot of different ways where that might, where a lot of things that may change, I imagine. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I can totally see a curriculum being redesigned just based off of that, just because we're teaching so much based on models right now.
Mm.
But I can also see some of the traditional parts of family therapy training, like the live supervision, like that still will continue, the experiential activities in the classroom, the role playing, but they will become more targeted. And the feedback will likely become more targeted with a measure like this.
I think so. I think we're in an era where we have a lot of new resources for being able to train, whether that's using simulation measures or
Mm.
tools where students can really rehearse a skill in a way that really wasn't possible when we were going through training, right? We would do
Yeah.
these role plays, but I was probably more interested in getting into character and or being really dramatic than I really was in being able to help my classmate. Or sometimes I would want to throw them a curveball and I would become a client that would just completely stump them. And so I probably have to apologize for that. But I think in a lot of ways we have a lot of opportunities now with advancing technology to be able to one identify gaps in skill
Mhm.
development, but then to create targeted exercises where we can say, hey, let's really hone in on this skill of empathy for the family. You were really empathetic to this family member, but not here. So let's rephrase, let's identify some ways that, and you can develop your own style, your own approach, but here are some guidelines for what we're looking for. And we can highlight that development and track that development over time with our
Mhm.
students.
Yeah. Madeline, you mentioned you're rating the skills from 0 to 3. Is that like a measure of like how well the skill is executed when you're rating it, the 0 to 3 scale, or does it indicate something else?
Um, Please correct me if I'm wrong, Adam,
Yeah.
but from my understanding, a 3 is like the best that you can do for that particular skill, while a 0 is that skill is basically not present.
Mm.
So, for example, with the inclusivity or with the inclusiveness measure, a 0 would be like only addressing one person or like just being very like individual in your approach, while as a 1 might be you refer to both or like vaguely refer to the system. A 2 might be you address two people, but you don't address them systemically. And then a 3 is addressing like two people and identifying their like role or relationship with one another. And how many people are you incorporating into, or how many people are you asking to respond or to reflect upon what you're saying? It is like this is the best outcome, or 3 is like the best, 0 is not present. But also, like Adam mentioned earlier, the skills are going to show up in different ways. There are certain situations where certain skills are going to need to be focused on more than others. So the goal is not necessarily to get a 3 in every single skill, because, like you mentioned, that would be a lot of talking on the therapist part, and the client wouldn't really get to say anything. But identifying where certain skills are really showing or where they're absent, but they probably should be present. So that's what we use the 0 through 3 for.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. What a great example also that you offer to illustrate this. So, Adam, is this how, when you talk about tracking improvement, is this what you have in mind? Tracking progression of skills from 0 to 3? Are we talking about tracking outcomes with like actual clients in some of these research studies you mentioned?
Great question. I think they go hand in hand. Both of those, I think, are really crucial. In terms of just tracking the development of these skills, something I've done in my supervision is to sit down with a student and I can say, let's find a really challenging moment from this week. What was your most challenging moment? And we can find that in the video. Let's watch it and let's look at how you handled it. Or let's find a moderately challenging moment that we can also explore or break down. And that's where we can watch what they're doing in the room. We can identify if there were skills that they displayed. And sometimes it's really encouraging because the students recognize, whoa, actually, this one I did really well. This was really present. This was here. And with other skills, it can give a kind of a concrete idea of where they can develop. So if it was this element of inclusion, by watching a therapist's response and saying, who else could you have engaged in this discussion? How could you have engaged the whole family or multiple members of the family in your response? And would that have been appropriate? And so we can explore that. And then that gives us an opportunity to role play with a much more targeted focus of a particular skill that we want to develop. And we can watch in future sessions to check back in and see where and are they improving in these skill areas. And so that can be an ongoing conversation, but also your mention of tracking client outcomes, I think, is hugely influential, because when we track how well the client is doing, oftentimes that will be our biggest teacher as to where the student can improve. So understanding the relationship elements that might be lacking in the therapeutic relationship, or if we're having clients that are giving perfect 10s, this is the best therapist ever, but we're not seeing any improvement. All of those are useful conversations to be able to dive a little bit deeper and saying, what's going on with this client? Have you really fostered an environment of feedback with this client? And maybe that connects to some of these skills, whether it's being collaborative, or have you really identified a shared sense of purpose within the family? And are they just in here to give you high marks? And maybe they are doing wonderfully well, but why isn't this translating to outcomes? And what else can we do or change in the therapy session? Connecting the skills to the client outcomes or outcome monitoring, I think, is crucial for, and I think hopefully is where a lot of our field will head in the future, to be able to have a much more data informed approach to addressing training, in that it'll help us to recognize situations where clients aren't improving and where we can intervene and adjust the trajectory for change.
Yeah. I think of two kind of movements here when, as you were talking. One is what Center University is doing, Tony Romanier, with the deliberate practice movement in
Mm-hmm.
psychotherapy, and how this measure could facilitate some of the process of deliberate practice of skills in training. And then I'm also thinking about Dr. Scott Miller's work around feedback informed treatment using the session rating scale, using the outcome rating scale, and also, again, corrective feedback based on client outcomes here, seeing how, yeah, there might be therapeutic alliance, but there's also the actual tracking of like how clients are doing in life, and whether that is a reflection of what you're doing in therapy, how well your interventions are working for the client. So exciting to hear all of this. I am just curious, when you think about how you envision using this in the future, tell me more about, if you could look at your crystal ball and visualize like an amazing future for our field. Tell me about collaborations you would like to have with other universities or sites to implement using the FSIS, and using it not just in research, but also in clinical projects or clinical training with students.
I think there would be a lot of opportunity to be able to implement this in new ways. We were just having a conversation with our faculty just yesterday. Our semester's just getting underway, and we were having a lot of conversations. There are these new training programs out there that can allow you to use simulation tools in really innovative ways, or to be able to create assignments for students where they can really hone in on particular elements of their work and really refine and improve certain skills. But what we don't have are objective measures that have been connected to client outcomes. And I don't want to put the cart before the horse here and say that ours is connected to client outcomes, because we're doing that study now. So hopefully we'll find that result soon. But it's worth our time as a field to really consider the skills that we're training toward. What are the elements that we really want our students to take away from this training that we're implementing, because if we don't have any idea whether they're connected to client outcomes and whether it really makes a difference in therapy, then why waste our time training it? And so I think there does need to be a real connection of these skills to the broader principles of what makes effective systemic therapy, whether it's having a shared sense of purpose within the family, having an environment of safety where people can express what they feel with each other, right? All of those, whatever the kind of the core principles are, we need to be continually connecting those. So I hope there will be a lot of opportunities to let's try out new research, but let's use existing objective behavioral measures and let's see what we find if therapists are developing in more of these objective ways. So I'd love to work together on with deliberate practice. We have some ongoing studies with deliberate practice. So we're doing a pilot study, starting that this semester, and then going forward, we'll look to include some more universities. So if anybody's interested, if they want to involve their students and focus on some skill development pieces, we'd be happy to share resources, or I'm happy to train faculty in how to use the rating measure if they want to use this in their own research. I'm not very protective of the direction that this is going. I hope it's useful and I hope other people will use it. And I'm very just excited for the possibilities. I have infinite ideas of ways that this could be teased. So I've had a lot of sit down brainstorming meetings with other people where we can design studies to test some of our questions.
Awesome. Yeah. Madeline, I saw you nodding. Are you part of this pilot study?
I don't believe so. I'm getting really close to the end of my time in the program, and I
Okay.
actually just moved away from Denton, and so I'm no longer living up there. But something that I did want to touch on that was actually one of the first posters that I helped Dr. Jones with, or that I worked with Dr. Jones with, was looking at the effect of deliberate practice and multicultural orientation and humility in conjunction with the FSIS task. And I don't, that was more of just looking at the data that we have, trying to figure out some of the connections between multicultural orientation, how confident therapists are feeling about their skills and their ability to address these challenging vignettes. I actually did the FSIS task before I was ever a part of the rating team. And it's intimidating being connected to all of the wires, and then you get into the first vignette and it's a crazy situation. And it's, I'm this little baby therapist. How am I supposed to respond to this? And all of the vignettes focus on some aspect of either sexuality, cultural differences, gender identity, things like that. And the FSIS task, not only is it helping to work on those skills, but it's also helping therapists and clinicians to increase their confidence and their efficacy in working with clients of all origins instead of just like their specific niche or population.
Lovely. Okay. And did you do that multiple times throughout the program, like we were saying earlier, or only one time, or how did that go?
I have only done it once because
Mhm.
of how involved I've been with the project, and
Right.
I've helped a little bit with, I've done the ratings, I've helped a lot with like data cleanup and marking events within the data so that way we can assess the biofeedback data. I have watched and listened to so many different people respond. It didn't really feel right for me to actually do it again because I have a bit of an unfair advantage. And
Right.
as
Yeah,
someone who's a
makes sense.
perfectionist, I know what they're looking for. And I haven't done it a second time, although I am interested, especially now that we have some new vignettes that were created by the university in Spain. Different
Ooh,
vignettes than the ones that I did initially. So I'm debating doing it again.
awesome. Wow, look at that. And so these vignettes, Adam, are they actual therapy sessions? Are they actors playing out the therapist client role?
They're all portrayed by actors. So
Okay.
we had developed a few vignettes at Texas Women's, and then actually, maybe this is, I guess I can indulge in a funny story. We had developed this measure, and we said now we need vignettes that we can show people and get their
Mhm.
responses. And right at that time, Mickey, who heard from a colleague, Valentina Escudero, who teaches in Spain, they had worked together on several projects with the SOFTA, which is a coding measure for the Therapeutic Alliance.
Mhm.
Anyway, he had reached out to her and said, I've developed these vignettes, but I don't have anything to rate them with. And so it was this perfect, fortuitous arrangement where he had the vignettes, we had the measure, and we were good to go. So we put them together and started doing the research.
Awesome. And how many vignettes are in a task?
So we typically show about 6. And though some of the studies that we're looking at, we find that we get pretty consistent scores after 4. So we're starting to just show 4. It makes it a little bit shorter, maybe less nerve-wracking for participants. So going
No.
forward, we'll just use 4 of the vignettes.
I see. And how long is each vignette? I'm assuming it's not a full session. You like
No,
stop it after a few minutes.
yeah, it's about 3 to 5 minutes watching a family in session discuss a different issue. There are various really challenging moments, and they are meant to be challenging. I watch them and I start to sweat a little bit. And I've had students that have finished responding to the vignettes and they've just said they've never physiologically felt their heart that felt like it was beating out of their chest, and they were terrified.
I've been one of those students, actually.
May have been, right? It's entirely nerve wracking. And what's been really exciting talking to the students as they go throughout their program is it becomes less stressful. It becomes, and not because they remember the vignettes or think, oh, I know what to say this time. They're just more experienced and they have a clearer model for where to go forward or what to do. And they're thinking about different things. So I'm really excited to explore both the qualitative changes in what they do and say over time, but also the physiological
Physiological.
change of how they approach those responses.
Yeah. So interesting and yes, nerve-wracking for sure. And they're instructed to respond like as if they are the therapist in that moment, right? When they give their responses. So talking to the client directly.
Yeah, we want them to imagine they're in the room and now they have to take the lead and figure out what to do with it. And like I said, they're not easy. And so the question is, you're in charge. And sometimes they might just want to ask a question, but sometimes they feel the pressure of, I'm the one tasked with doing something with this situation. So I need to figure out what a pathway forward is. And so that I think is where we really get some insight into how they're thinking about cases.
Okay, awesome. We're coming towards the end of our conversation here. I'm wondering, I'm sure I have missed so many things that we could be talking about. Is there something specific that you wanted to highlight about FSIS, Adam, that we just haven't touched on?
I think we've been pretty thorough. I hope this is something that if people want to learn more about or understand a little bit more, they're more than welcome to reach out to me and I'll share a link with some more information if they want to visit, or they can get an overview of some of the skills that we're looking at, or if they want my contact information or Mickey Friedlander's information, they can reach out to either of us and explore how they might be able to use the measure themselves. And so I'm happy to share and collaborate and hope people find it useful.
Yes, fantastic. So, what would be a good contact point for you? Is there an email people should use?
Yeah, my email is ajones116@twu.edu. And that's my university email, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, and we'll chat more about it.
Awesome, fantastic. And Madeline, how can listeners interested in what you do as a beginner therapist and an experienced researcher at this point, how can they reach out to you?
Also, the best way would be through my university email. It's mschock, mschock @twu.edu.
Fantastic. All right. I want to thank you both so much for sharing your
Yeah.
experiences, your skills, your expertise. I see FSIS having a pretty solid impact on the way we teach and learn how to do marriage and family therapy in the future. And so I'm really thankful you came and talked about this passion project of yours, Adam, and lovely to see you involving students in research too. I hope our listeners found today's discussion equally enlightening and inspiring. We're going to add all the information we discussed today in the show notes for folks interested in this work to reach out to Adam. If you're hungry for more engaging conversations about teaching systemic therapy, be sure to follow Learning and Teaching Systemic Therapy. We post monthly wherever you can find podcasts. Stay tuned. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, this is Dr. Sofia Georgiadou signing off for Learning and Teaching Systemic Therapy.